Are remote islands the ultimate bug out location when shit hits the fan? They might be. I'm on Monhegan, one of the most remote islands off the coast of Maine, to investigate this idea if remote islands are the bug out location that you want to go to when the apocalypse strikes. Now, the short answer to that question is maybe. The too long didn't watch answer to the question is, if it's a short-term notice type of situation, oh my god, shit is hitting the fan, we need to go somewhere to be safe, to escape, going to a remote island might be, probably isn't, the best place to go to survive. However, if you have advanced planning and resources, a remote island can be one of the best places to go to survive an apocalypse. But stopping there is going to rob you of the opportunity to explore this idea with me, to explore this beautiful island with me, and to think through bug out locations and some of the hurdles you might face and how to prepare for and overcome those hurdles and survive the apocalypse. Our adventure begins in the town of Port Clyde in the Gulf of Maine, where we board a ferry to Monhegan. This is one of just 3 ferries to the island. It runs every day during the summer months and then scales back to just 3 days a week during the winter. This is the only way to get to the island unless you have your own boat. The island is 12 nautical miles from the mainland and the trip takes a little over an hour one way. The island itself is 1.75 miles long and 0.75 miles wide. Most of the island is uninhabited conservation land. That land includes 17 miles of hiking trails which lead to high cliffs overlooking the sea. The island does have an interesting history that is worth mentioning. During King Philip's War in 1675, English settlers from the mainland had to escape to Monhegan, i.e. they bugged out to the island before later being relocated elsewhere along the coast. So Monhegan already has a history as a bug out location, but that was in the 1600s. How would it work out today? We will examine it through the lens of 9 survival essentials: community, water, food, fuel, shelter, security, communications, medical care, and transportation. The idea is certainly romanticized, isn't it? We've all read the story of Swiss Family Robinson, the family that survived on a remote island for an extended period of time and lived quite well. But that's fiction, isn't it? How would that play out in real life? So let's get a survival tour of this island, Monhegan Island, and use it as a case study for remote islands as bug out destinations in an apocalypse. Now, what about people? You've come to a remote island to escape your biggest threat in apocalypse. People. What about the people on the island? The locals on the island, and this is certainly true for Maine islands, and I suspect it's true for all islands, the locals are the people who really own the island. You might be a tourist, you might be a visitor, you might even be someone from away who owns land on the island, but in a shit hits a fan situation, it's the locals who will rule, and you need to be in with them or you will be out with them. The year-round population is around 75 people. The summer population reaches about 200 people. So, as you can probably imagine, those 70 year-round residents are going to know each other very well and will form their own mutual assistance group by default should a crisis strike. If you simply arrived on the island during a collapse, expect that you will not be welcomed by the locals unless you have skills that they would need. The Monhegan village itself includes a church, private homes, hotels, art studios, and a few small stores. The island does have a small one-room school. That school has just 1 teacher and 4 students. When the kids reach high school age, they typically go to boarding schools on the mainland. It also has a volunteer fire department, but there is not much in the way of resources there, so wildfires are always a serious concern. Let's move to the most obvious need to consider: clean, potable water. A big portion of the island's potable water is drawn from a marshy area. A network of pipes draws water from the marsh via a pump house that is powered by a few diesel generators. You can hear the pumps working in the background. That water is filtered and bleach is added to kill off dangerous bacteria. People have criticized my advice to stock bleach for purifying water, saying I offer dangerous advice and bleach is poison, but in the correct ratios it is perfectly safe as evidenced here. The clean water is then pumped up the hill to a larger water holding tank where it is dispersed to homes. 2 obvious problems here: this process requires diesel fuel to operate the pumps and a steady supply of bleach. There is one additional source of potential water, a small pond, ice pond, which ducks use and which contains small fish. Not all cottages and houses on this island have to rely on water being filtered and pumped to their residences. However, many houses on the island, probably the minority, actually have drilled wells. Installing a drilled well here is expensive, and you need a lot that would allow for it. Smart island residents and preppers utilize rain barrels to supplement their water sources. Now comes the subject of food, and how are you going to get food on a remote island? Well, there are a few options actually, some of which might be better than you would think. There's only so much food on the island at any given time, and buying it here costs about 30% more. There's just one store that offers groceries, and that supply would quickly run out after a collapse. There are a few restaurants that would have some food stocked during summer months, but those would also quickly run out. Good news is that there is a supply of coffee, and the island even has a seasonal brewery that could produce surprisingly good beer for a period of time. Obtaining more food during a collapse would require a return to Monhegan's historical roots as a fishing destination. However, most seagoing vessels in the harbor also require precious diesel fuel. When that ran out, residents would have to rely on the few muscle-powered rowboats and sailboats to fish around the shores. Lobstering, as you can imagine with any Maine island or coastal community, would also be a method to get food. Thinking outside the box a bit, there are seals on nearby rocks that could be, well, clubbed to death. There are also other random edible animals like this little island rat I found while walking the trails. Of course, there are also various seabirds that could be killed and roasted over a fire. On the subject of birds, you could also keep your own. At least one resident keeps pheasants. Growing your own food makes the most sense, and many residents do have summer gardens to help provide fresh produce and to cut the cost of groceries. A serious island prepper would certainly have a garden, raised beds, and a greenhouse to extend the growing season. Soil supplements come in from the mainland. This might make sense for seasonal residents who are already wealthy enough to own real estate on the island, but you could also make your own compost. If you became very hungry, very desperate, you might develop a taste for long pork, and in that case, you might find lost tourists wandering the island. Fuel is scarce on the island, gasoline in particular. Virtually all homes rely heavily on propane, whether for cooking or heat. From a prepper's perspective, propane is a great fuel because it's stable and has no expiration date. Still, propane must come in via the mainland, and island residents are heavily reliant on it. That fuel supply would come to an abrupt end when shit hit the fan. Now, what about weather? It's beautiful here today, but winters here are long and brutal. Very cold, very dark, very windy, prone to storm. How are you going to stay warm? Some homes use firewood, but that is also brought in from the mainland. The cost of that must be astronomical, but firewood is perfect for preppers. If push came to shove in a sudden crisis, you could always tear down old buildings and burn the material to stay warm. Fortunately, this island is covered by a lot of land and conservation, i.e., it has trees, i.e., it has fuel. The trees on conservation land can't be cut and processed into firewood today, but after a collapse, who cares? You would just need to make sure that you have the hand tools already stocked to help you process that firewood. For some reason, whether it's cost or otherwise, island residents do not make much use of renewable energies. A few do, but more should. What about shelter? This island has a lot of trees and forest, but you will not have to build a primitive shelter here in order to survive, thankfully, because there are plenty of houses, cottages, seasonal residences, and year-round residences here that could be utilized for shelter in an apocalypse. Houses on the island are, as you would guess, expensive. A 2-bedroom seasonal house will cost you over $600,000, and larger, nicer homes easily exceed $1 million. But if there was a great die-off in a prolonged collapse, houses would become abandoned, and that would be your opportunity to have beautiful waterfront housing for free. In the meantime, if you're lucky and still have money, building a tiny home might be an option. One of the biggest security concerns on the island would actually be raiders, people who are coming to the island looking to steal, rape, pillage, whatever might be left on the island. Now, on the far side of the island is pretty much all the way to Bermuda from here, so these can be treacherous waters leading to shipwrecks. Raiders could shipwreck on the island, allowing you to raid the raiders. There's no law enforcement on the island short of this public call box, which I can't tell if it's operational or not, so residents would have to defend themselves. They would have to take turns keeping watch for approaching vessels and have the means to alert other residents so everyone could rush to defense at a moment's notice. They might have to run the roads on the islands and the pathways, alerting others, much like a post-apocalyptic island living Paul Revere would. Alternatively, there is an old bell on the island that could be repurposed as an island alarm system. Isolation would be one of the best benefits of going to a remote island. That's the idea, getting away from people, getting away from your threats. But unless you're a deranged hermit, being alone, that isolated for an extended period of time can lead to becoming a deranged hermit. Maybe you're okay with that, maybe you're not. If you're not, what are you going to do to pass the time?
You could pass the time reading books from the island's mini library, but don't expect to find any non-fiction survival books to help you survive the post-apocalyptic world, as this is a library that specializes in children's books and books about Monhegan and coastal Maine. Communications is another key aspect of survival, and Monhegan's remote location will present challenges there, but there are options. There's a radio tower on the island that could be used for ham radio operations. There's also a lighthouse that could, in a pinch, be used to send Morse code messages to the mainland or other islands.
Now, what about first aid and medical care? How are you going to prepare for that? And what's that look like on a remote island? Well, you can prepare for medical care in advance if you've got know-how and supplies and a community on the island.
The island does have a volunteer-run first aid clinic of sorts with limited hours, but don't expect any kind of advanced care or pharmaceuticals. Serious injuries and health conditions will almost certainly lead to death. Fortunately, there's a beautiful cemetery on top of the hill where you can bury the dead.
Transportation, that's an easy one. Getting around the island really just depends upon your ability to walk.
You will find some bicycles, side-by-sides, and golf carts, but only residents are allowed to have vehicles on the island.
The biggest source of transportation that you're going to need is getting on and off the island should that need arise or when that need arises.
Sailboats or motorboats are what you'll need, and if it's motorboats, then you'll have to plan for stocking the fuel needed to power those boats. That would be smart because you don't know when you would need an emergency trip to the mainland and or to escape the island. Remote islands certainly present many challenges when trying to survive a collapse, but if it is truly the end of the world and our odds of surviving it are nil, or you plan on not sticking around anyway, there are a few places in the world as nice as Monhegan where you could spend your final days walking this world. Perishing here wouldn't be pretty, but maybe it would be.
So those are my thoughts on remote islands as the ultimate bug out location in a serious shit hits the fan type of event. Tell me what I got right, tell me what I got wrong, and tell me where you would go if shit hit the fan and you had to survive for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Now I need to catch up with my wife, who says we need to hurry or we will miss the ferry back to the mainland.